100 years ago, Britain ruled the biggest empire the world has ever seen. And this is the story of a Sikh prince whose Indian kingdom was part of it. Through the life of Duleep Singh, the last Maharaja of Lahore, the dark heart of the British Empire is laid bare. It's a tale of theft, seduction, and ultimately betrayal. As Duleep went from the cream of Victorian high society,
what Indian Maharaja would be seen with a portrait of Queen Victoria, the very archetype of the British Empire, strung in pearls around his neck,
to an outcast, determined to rebel.
He thinks, right, I'm going to go back and take my kingdom. I will show you all. Then those words of bitterness come out. Words like betrayal, words like treachery.
In this program, Duleep's letters, newly discovered after being lost for over a century, show his innermost feelings.
Nothing else but revenge, revenge, revenge.
And documents in government archives reveal the ruthlessness with which Britain tried to undermine his rebellion.
There are two things that make this particularly exciting. The fact it's secret, and the fact it survived at all when it should have been burned.
Duleep Singh is still revered by many Sikhs today. But the complete history of what the British Empire did to him and his struggle against it has not been told until now. India in 1848 was not a unified country, but a patchwork of ancient kingdoms. And sitting on the throne of Lahore was a 10-year-old boy, Duleep Singh. He ruled an immensely wealthy Sikh kingdom that covered much of present-day Pakistan and northwest India. He had a stable full of elephants and 60 boys as official playmates, who all had to do as he said. But then, in November 1848, Duleep's kingdom was invaded. Hungry for its riches, Britain was gobbling up the subcontinent, and now it was after Lahore.
It was a vital area for Britain to have control over, for trade, for security, for agriculture as well. So the river navigation, all of these things were key.
Having crushed the Sikh army, the British put the boy Maharaja under arrest in his own palace.
He's got these people with different coloured skin to himself, their shiny epaulets, the importance. He doesn't perhaps quite understand who they are, but they're suddenly in charge. So imagine the isolation of a confused little boy like that.
Britain's land grab of Lahore changed the course of history. Because since Duleep Singh gave up the kingdom of Lahore, it has never again existed as a separate state. For many of the 400,000 Sikhs now living in the UK, Duleep is an iconic figure, their last Maharaja. Businessman Davinder Toor has a museum-quality collection of art from the lost kingdom of the Sikhs. Among his treasures is a double portrait of Duleep Singh as a young boy with the Governor-General of India. Lord Dalhousie, a Scottish aristocrat and high-up Freemason, was now in control of Duleep's life.
You look at the image and you can see that neither of them are sort of making eye contact, or Housie looks sort of quite stern and quite rigid. And there he is with this young guy, young Maharaja, who's now in his care, and Duleep Singh must be wondering, what's going to happen to him. He's really thinking about his future.
Until now, defeated Maharajas had struck deals with the British and were left in place as puppet rulers. But now Dalhousie was in charge, and he despised Indian royals. He said, "Such families are for the most part the idlest, the most dissolute, and the most vicious."
He never uses any language that is explicitly, about skin colour as such, but he's very disparaging, very dismissive of the character of Asian people. He says that Duleep Singh is a brat begotten of a Bishti. A Bishti was a water carrier, and he has no qualms about shunting poor little Duleep Singh, the 10-year-old ruler, out of power.
Dalhousie dethroned Duleep, but let him keep the now worthless title of Maharaja because Dalhousie didn't want to inflame the region's Sikhs, for many of whom Duleep was almost divine.
The conquest is achieved, but the peace has to be won. The Sikhs are conceived as a martial race, as people who fight, and in that sense their military loyalty is very important to the British. It's very important that they are either neutral or in some way supporting what the British are doing.
Dalhousie got rid of the Sikh courtiers and advisors around the boy Maharaja. Even Duleep's mother was sent away, torn screaming from his arms.
One minute she's there, one minute he feels her every day, he's sitting on her lap, in the court, she is his strength and his pillar, and the next day she is not there anymore.
Then, Dalhousie sent Duleep hundreds of miles away from the Sikh heartlands to a remote British military outpost on the river Ganges, Fatehgarh. Here, life was comfortable, but aged only 11, Duleep was pretty much a prisoner.
Even on the levels of cruelty that I sort of feel existed at that time, I think that would have been torture.
Some British officials worried about Dalhousie's treatment of Duleep, but they were reassured by the young Maharaja's composure. There were no tears. His face was a blank.
Tell me how many children are blank-faced at his age, unless there is something seriously bad going on inside. But also, it's this huge desire from the British to exonerate themselves from what they've done. So if they can look upon him and they don't see weeping and wailing, they can think it doesn't matter. When in their hearts they know it matters. They know it matters.
Peter Bance has the world's largest collection of objects related to the last Sikh Maharaja of Lahore. Among them is a book given to Duleep when he was 12 years old and under British control.
So I've got a Bible which was presented to the Maharaja in 1850, and it was actually found in a broom cupboard in one of the houses which was associated with the Duleep Singhs. And so it sadly lost its front cover, and I think the mice had a field day as well at the book. And it's got an inscription. This token of appreciation has been presented to His Highness the Maharajah Duleep Singh, and it's dated Fatehgarh, 22nd of December, 1850. And what's more lovely about this Bible, that Maharaja has actually underlined various verses and prayers which he either meant something to him or maybe he wanted to delve into. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh, the receiveth, and he that seeketh, findeth, and to him that knocketh, it shall be opened. Interesting.
Duleep was introduced to the Bible by the army doctor who Dalhousie had ordered to take care of the young Maharaja. John Logan was 40 years old, liked parlour games, and believed the British Empire was a civilizing influence. Dalhousie had given Britain control over Duleep. Logan's role was to get inside his mind.
Logan is very keen to make him a role model to Indians about how to live a kind of a morally upstanding, domesticated life. He sees Duleep Singh as his heaven-sent opportunity to create that kind of moral revolution in India.
Logan and his wife Leena lived with Duleep at Fatehgarh. They tried to make Duleep feel at home with them. And he was soon calling Logan his Ma Baap.
So Ma Baap, there's no equivalence in English. It's a really extraordinarily Indian expression. It means my mother, father, my everything, the person I trust most in the world. So you can see this is somebody who has completely attached to John Logan in a really quite shockingly short space of time. He's calling him that. And he trusts him. And why does he trust him? Somebody who, looks different, has been his escort away from his home and everything that he knows, because he's desperately looking for an anchor. Of course he's going to attach, and he attaches very, very hard.
The Logans showed Duleep how to speak, write, and even draw like them. He did these meticulous sketches of British India when he was barely in his teens.
He was desperate to please them, because if you please them, then maybe you can keep them. And God, he needs some stability in his life. So what does he do? He learns to walk and talk like a Britisher. And most importantly of all, he picks up the Bible, because the Bible is what is central to the Logan's life.
Logan was respectful when he was doing anything that might interfere with Duleep's Sikh identity. As well as the Bible, Duleep was allowed to read the Granth, the Sikh holy book, and to keep his hair uncut.
Uncut hair as a sort of traditional act in India is really one of the many symbols of a kind of a warrior code. And one of the requirements to join the Sikh faith is to not cut your hair. The hair is probably the most visible and notable symbol of Sikh identity.
Though Britain ruled India for 2 centuries, many documents that might help explain how the empire held on to power were long ago lost or destroyed. But the personal archives of the Logans did survive. Their family scrapbooks reveal the progress of their cultural seduction of Duleep. This remarkable evidence was lost for over a century, until curator Jasdeep Singh came along.
This is something that was found totally by chance, and it's a 2-volume archive. I was looking for another object, researching in the archive stores, and I read the spine of the album, and it said, Lady Logan's Recollections. Maybe if it was another curator that wasn't as well versed with the subject, it would have gone unnoticed. But I knew Logan, and immediately when I opened it, I was surprised. It's such a mammoth collection, this is.
Pasted into the Logan scrapbooks are letters they wrote revealing their genuine affection for Duleep, who they called a dear fellow. There's also a photo of him as a teenager.
It's the earliest known photograph of the Maharaja. He's shown in this photograph looking off at a distance. I think he's looking into his distant future. A future he didn't really know what the future held for him.
The Logans also kept the letters Duleep wrote to them whenever they went away.
It gives us a great insight into the personality of Duleep Singh. In his own words, we know about his voice through his own letters. You know, the young boy that's asking for toys and kites to play with, to letters where he says, I hope that you will not look at my mistakes in writing or spelling, but he makes an error in spelling the word writing. But it's just a really simple but sincere insight into his personality. I came across this page and I was truly blown away by this. This is the hair of Maharajah Duleep Singh. It's accompanied by a note that says, My dear Mrs. Logan, I have the pleasure to send you a little of my hair. As I promise, I do not like to cut more at a time, lest I should spoil my appearance.
To cut your hair is really repudiating everything about your Sikh faith and the culture that you were born into. To then give that hair to his guardian must have been a very profoundly moving act and difficult for him.
2 years later, Duleep, still only 15 years old, chose to convert to Christianity. The ancestral ruler of the greatest ever Sikh kingdom was no longer a Sikh. Lena Logan was one of the few there at Duleep's baptism. She described the look on his face as half sad, half curious.
Because I've become quite fond of Logan and Lena Logan, and I think that they were good people who were often questioning what they were doing to this little boy. I don't think they were deliberately trying to convert him. To me, the reality is even sadder than that. He tried to do the things that would make them happy, because if they're happy, then they will love him.
Lord Dalhousie soon saw a new opportunity in the Christian Maharaja. In the mid-1800s, many Britons still doubted the morality of the imperial project. Critics pointed out the injustice of Britain getting rich on the enslavement of hundreds of millions of imperial subjects. Dalhousie, India's Governor-General, found himself denounced as a profiteer. Then, in 1854, the 16-year-old Duleep asked if he could visit Britain.
Initially, we've got to bear in mind, it's just meant to be an educational trip. It's not a permanent move, okay, for 1 year or 2 years maximum. So Dalhousie weighs this up very carefully, and he decides that actually it's probably not a bad thing. It might also be good publicity. The fact that he's seemingly a nice boy and that he converts to Christianity, okay, it's all well and good in Dalhousie's eyes. And he tries to use him as a poster boy as much as he is useful to his cause.
Duleep and the Logans made the 6-week sea voyage to Britain. They decided to begin their visit in London, a city that was doing very well out of India.
If you look at London and you think, well, how did 400 square miles of Victorian houses full of servants come to be? Well, it was the revenues from India flowing to provide pensions for civil servants who'd work for 20 years and retire with an absolute fortune. It's an absolutely crucial engine of British prosperity.
Duleep was the first Maharaja to visit London when, in May 1854, he booked himself into the fashionable Claridge's Hotel.
He's hugely, hugely exotic. He's like a rare creature plucked from the jungles of India. And people want to see him. Crowds gathered outside Claridge's to witness this spectacle of a very good-looking, dark-skinned, doe-eyed man in a turban with jewels and a Kashmiri Afghan. It must have been like some film premiere.
Even Queen Victoria wanted to meet him. So, on the 1st of July, 1854, Duleep took tea at Buckingham Palace. That night, the 35-year-old mother of 8 confided in her journal, "He is extremely handsome, beautifully dressed, and covered with diamonds." She pitied the boy who'd had his kingdom taken, but Victoria was as determined an empire builder as anyone.
Queen Victoria is a very intelligent woman. And I think she has a very coherent vision of her statecraft. So for Queen Victoria, the British Empire isn't just something that hangs off Britain while she is queen. It is something in which she is an active agent.
One of the Queen's most treasured possessions was the Koh-i-Noor diamond, worth an estimated £100 million in today's money. But before it had been Victoria's, it had been Duleep's.
The Koh-i-Noor diamond is the symbol of conquest in India. That is sent directly to Queen Victoria in 1850 by Dalhousie, and for her it is the symbol of her expansion of the Indian Empire. Then, 4 years later, comes the boy whose royal treasure this all should have been. So she's got the lot. She's got the symbols of conquest, and she's also now got the captive heir to the throne.
Victoria invited Duleep back to the palace and brought out her precious diamond.
She lets him stroke the Koh-i-Noor. I mean, what's going on there? It's an amazing incident. Here's the thing that signifies your power. Now it's mine, and you can touch it.
Duleep took his ancestral jewel to an open palace window. An eyewitness later described the excruciating tension as Duleep held the diamond up to the light. They feared he was about to throw it out. But Duleep walked back to Victoria and placed the Koh-i-Noor in her hand.
By that point in his life, he'd got to a state where he realised that actually he was a subject of the Queen. I mean, what Indian Maharaja would be seen with a portrait of Queen Victoria, the very sort of archetype of the British Empire, strung in pearls around his neck?
In India, his guardian John Logan had shown Duleep homely British pleasures. Now, at Queen Victoria's court, he was introduced to the most glamorous society in Britain.
Here I have some perfume bottles which came from the Maharaja's personal vanity box, and you can see the Maharaja's coat of arms and can still smell the perfume.
Duleep designed a unique look for himself that was part Maharaja and part British aristocrat.
And I've actually got something to show you. You follow me.
One of Peter Bance's most intimate mementos of Duleep dates from the time when the teenage Maharaja first emerged onto the London scene.
This is one of my most treasured possessions. An original jacket which was worn by the Maharaja when he came to England. It's silk-lined, velvet, and all the embroidery work's actually done with real gold threadwork.
Duleep seemed to be enjoying his life at court, but he was being drawn into Victoria's latest big idea. She wanted to be declared Empress of India. She saw herself as a royal mother figure to the subcontinent's kings and queens. The young Duleep was among the first to be invited into this new imperial family.
He starts to feel he is part of their family, that he is part of the most powerful family in the world. This gives him a very inflated sense of who he is, which is so distant from the reality. So I don't think he really understands who he is.
Victoria underlined Duleep's new status as Britain's Indian royal by inviting him to the wedding of her eldest son, the Prince of Wales, and putting him centre stage.
It's fascinating how he is incorporated into that royal world. And even though he's a deposed prince, Prime Minister's at the back, Duleep Singh's at the front. That says, I think, volumes about how the royals see him. The vision that's created of Duleep Singh is as someone of royal birth, of royal blood.
Back in India, Governor-General Lord Dalhousie heard Duleep was getting the royal treatment. He wrote to a friend complaining that breakfasting with queens and princesses might give the Maharaja ideas above his station.
Whereas, of course, Victoria sees Duleep Singh as having royal blood, Dalhousie has a very different view. He sees him as having Eastern blood, and that Eastern blood is in some way inferior to Western Christian blood. So it irks him deeply that Duleep Singh is being accorded this status as a royal figure, as an equal to the family, the British royal family, which Dalhousie himself knows he personally would never be given that kind of treatment.
Then, in 1857, just as Duleep was preparing to return to India, the so-called Indian Mutiny erupted. After years of rumbling discontent under Dalhousie's rule, native Indian troops rose up. They massacred their British officers, women and children too. Many of the princes and Maharajas the British had deposed found themselves briefly back on their thrones. Over 100,000 Indians died before British rule was re-established.
1857 is seared into the British imagination as the most fundamental threat to the integrity of the empire since the American Revolution.
After 1857, control of the subcontinent was managed directly from London by a special government department, the India Office.
The India Office, their attitude to Duleep Singh is all about containment. Don't let him get near Lahore, a vulnerable part of the Indian Empire. It's very much the case that it is loyal, but you can never take it for granted. And Duleep is seen always as a potential focal point for rebellion.
The all-powerful India Office decided that to ensure the security of the empire, the Maharaja of Lahore ought to stay out of India. And Duleep agreed to make his visit to Britain an indefinite stay.
He can see that actually he's going to have a much more comfortable life in England. The way in which he is received with such open arms, such lavish hospitality into the British royal family, can you blame him for wanting to dive into that?
Duleep's new life as a Brit began in the heart of the English countryside. His friend and fellow royal, the Prince of Wales, had just been given Sandringham, a vast country estate in East Anglia. Duleep asked if he could have a place like this too. And the India Office shelled out £110,000 for Elveden Hall in Suffolk.
And he wanted this house to be his own Indian palace. Wanted it to be reminiscent to the fine Mughal architectural splendours that he'd been used to and accustomed to. We've got some plans for the house, how the house, which was a small manor house, or a modest manor house, and how he had redesigned it.
Duleep commissioned a leading architect to redesign Elveden, giving him paintings of the grandest Indian palaces as a guide to the style he wanted.
And we've got some really lovely shots of the house's interior, with its fine archways and the plasterwork, and each corner had the Maharaja's initials, DS.
Duleep made Elveden fit for a king. A visitor described, "The interior of the hall was sumptuous, its silken hangings and mirrors, its gilded ceiling, and the elaborate screen in gold and silver tracery." Outside, it was just as exotic. The great trees about the house were full of curious parrots. Huge vultures and sleepy-looking eagles were chained to posts. Kangaroos, hunting leopards, and monkeys were also there.
Elveden is his way of saying the Maharaja lives here. You know, stuffing leopards in a pen, even though they're going to shiver and be miserable. He is showing off and hemorrhages money while doing so.
Duleep spent what would be millions in today's money doing up Elveden. But in the shadow of the 1857 rebellion, the India Office would pay almost any price to keep their tame Maharaja happy.
So he extracts money from on repeated occasions, not just to buy the house, but adjoining villages to consolidate the estate. And always it's through, firstly, you know, some tussling with the government. When that doesn't work out, he gets in touch with Queen Victoria.
Victoria had high expectations of her protégé Duleep Singh. Not least that, as a royal, his first duty was to ensure the continuation of his dynasty. But there was a problem.
He couldn't get a woman to marry him. You know, they would flirt with him, but he was always the dirty little secret, because who on earth would want to be saddled, using the terms of the day, with mongrel children? And so nobody was willing to take him seriously as a partner. So he starts to feel like an outsider. And I think that's why he goes for somebody who is such an outsider, not just to the British court, but to the world, like Bamba.
Bamba Mullah was the illegitimate child of a North African slave and a German businessman, and was a devout Christian. Duleep met her in Cairo, where he'd gone in search of a woman who, as he said, loved the Lord and was decidedly Oriental.
They don't even speak the same language. You know, she speaks Arabic, he speaks not a word of Arabic, he speaks English, she doesn't speak any English, and yet almost immediately he goes, yep, she's the one. Why? Because she is the human embodiment of this kind of lack of fitting in that he experiences. And I think on some level they can be outsiders together. That's what he thinks.
Bamba was just 16 when she married the 26-year-old Duleep Singh in 1864. 2 years later, they had a son named Victor in honor of the Queen. By 1871, Frederick, Bamba, and Catherine had come along too.
She was permanently pregnant from the moment she was married to him, pretty much. But he made her completely miserable, actually. When she was a doll and she was pretty and could be paraded around in these outfits that he designed for her, she was doing what she needed to do. But as a wife and as somebody to talk to, I think he always thought she was beneath him because she was this cloistered girl who didn't know anything about the world.
For Duleep, what mattered most now was being part of Victorian high society, who flocked to Elveden for his luxurious house parties.
When you first see that photograph, it's almost indistinguishable. Who is the Indian Maharaja? And you sort of scan around, and when you see him, then you realise, it's the dark-skinned one. And I think that says everything about his life. Here he is, sort of every bit the Victorian kind of English squire, but he's an Indian. The
pictures are interesting in that they show Duleep Singh in a very kind of casual pose with his cap and his stylish little outfit. He's a bit on the plump side because obviously living a very cushy life in Elveden as well. And they show that he's truly at ease in those kind of circles.
Baronets, lords, and dukes came to stay with Duleep. His near neighbour, the Prince of Wales, was a regular guest, a social achievement that Duleep recorded in photographs.
What he would have done with those pictures is also important. So he would have kept some of them on display in his house for certain, but he would also send copies of those pictures to the Queen and to the Prince of Wales, effectively as a memento of the time that they'd spent together at Elveden, him and the Prince of Wales. So in a way, it's another layer of maintaining that close personal relationship with the British royal family.
In 1878, Duleep turned 40. He and Bamba had 2 more children, Sophia and Albert. Victoria agreed to be Sophia's godmother. The Queen had recently got her way and been declared Empress of India.
After the Queen is made Empress, and this huge Durbar is given, which is a kind of festival given in India, at a time of famine and typhoid are raging. Some people think this is rather vulgar, actually, but we're playing this game. And you get to a point where holding India becomes the absolute symbol of Britain's place in the world.
The Tweedy Maharaja must have felt untouchable. But then, in 1879, Duleep was rudely reminded of how vulnerable his position was as an Indian living off the British state.
Within the government, there starts to be some resistance against giving Duleep Singh more money. And it's also a case of, well, okay, hang on, why is he special? Why should we be giving him more money?
Despite its empire, Britain had been hit by a worldwide economic depression. The government was making cuts and wasn't happy about the India Office footing the enormous bills for keeping Elveden running on the scale of a royal palace.
And his first reaction is, la la la, I can't hear you. He just ignores them completely.
He felt really that he should sort of almost have unfettered access to money in order to keep him as a king, albeit in a king in exile.
Then a bank demanded repayment of its loans. If Duleep didn't settle, he'd be declared bankrupt. In desperation, he agreed a deal. The India Office paid his debts, but in return, took Elveden. Duleep could carry on living there, but when he died, the government would inherit his palace, not his children.
I think it was more than just what Elveden represented to him. I mean, this, in a sense, was history replaying itself. He was being asked to accept a situation where his children would be disinherited, just as he was disinherited from his father's kingdoms.
Until now, Duleep's life had led him deeper and deeper into the British establishment. But in the 1880s, his world undermined, he grew restless. He brought out the treaty he'd signed with the British when he was a child. In it, the British government promised him an income of at least £40,000 a year, then enough to live like a king. But Duleep's pension from the India Office was about half what was agreed in the treaty.
Duleep Singh felt that he was entitled to the whole thing, and also that he should be able to maintain a royal status. So those are the two seeds that come to shape his character significantly, I think, and which will lead to trouble later on in his life.
Duleep discovered why his pension had been cut in half. It was all thanks to Lord Dalhousie. He'd been dead over a decade, but was wreaking revenge from beyond the grave. Because the British government was following a secret policy set by Dalhousie not to give Duleep his full whack.
Dalhousie is all about that status, keeping Duleep Singh under his thumb. But really, I don't think Dalhousie has any real interest in what's going to happen to Duleep Singh. He just wants him to quietly conform and fade away from history.
Duleep decided to expose Dalhousie's ill treatment of him. He published a book, The Maharajah Duleep Singh and the Government. In it, he noted the Governor-General's eye for profit, and he described how his childhood had been stolen by the British Empire.
The whole reason for his rage and anger in later life is that he saw his childhood in a very different way. I think when he was going through it, he was just surviving it. He was doing what he could do best to get through it. I don't think he woke up as an 11-year-old boy and thought, oh my God, I'm in a prison. 11-year-olds don't think in such grand terms. And there were no walls and there were no bars. But I think later on in life, when he looked back and grieved for the first time for that little boy, then those words of bitterness come out, words like prison, words like betrayal, words like treachery. They weren't words that a child would have used, but they're certainly words that a processing adult who's going through delayed rage will go through.
In his early 40s, Duleep abandoned Elveden and moved to this house in West London. He gave up the respectable life that Victoria and the India Office had created for him and became a man about town. He even started going out to nightclubs.
It is the equivalent of riding around on a Harley Davidson with your ears pierced. It's just a nonsense behaviour which you can look at and you can go, oh dear, you poor thing, what are you doing?
One fellow clubber described how Duleep turned up at a haunt of showgirls with one of his ancestral jewels and said, "What nice little girl is going to have this?"
He has a wife at home who loves him. He has children at home. He's creating scandals and embarrassing himself all over London.
The London press are starting to paint a very different impression of Duleep Singh as a kind of a debonair, playboy, gambler. And that obviously comes at odds with the kind of image that Victoria was keen to champion of him as a good boy, as a family man, as a model landowner, and as a good Christian, really.
She, of course, is absolutely shocked and aghast. And this is the phrase she used, he's off his head.
Victoria told the government to give Duleep more money to encourage him to return to Elveden. So in early 1886, an India Office bureaucrat met Duleep at this gentleman's club and made him an offer. If he promised to behave himself, the government would give him a one-off payment of £50,000. It was about a tenth of what Duleep reckoned he'd been promised when he gave up his kingdom. He called it a paltry sum before refusing it, saying, "I laugh at you."
Money doesn't mean anything to him. It happens to be the thing that pays for the lifestyle that he wants and the status that he wants. And those things he wants because he thinks that's who he is. And if those things go, then who is he? If he isn't the Maharaja, then who is he?
On the 31st of March, 1886, Duleep, Bamba, and their 6 children boarded a ship for India. He'd had it up to here with British hypocrisy and was going home where people really did regard him as a Maharaja and where he could afford to live like one.
My sense on that visit to India was that there really was no grand plan. I think actually that's what speaks of his naivety about the bigger political world that he was living in.
By the 1880s, undersea telegraph cables meant communication between Britain and its empire was instantaneous. The news that Duleep was on his way soon reached India. A British colonel in Lahore warned that the spirit of the Sikhs is not dead. I should tremble in my shoes should Duleep Singh arrive at our borders.
We can't underestimate that paranoia that many British officials have. That coincides with the close monitoring of Duleep Singh's travel plans and whether he will actually get to Lahore.
In 1886, the British Empire was already the largest the world had ever seen. It would soon cover almost a quarter of the Earth's landmass. One recent conquest was Aden in what is now Yemen, and after 3 weeks at sea, Duleep's ship stopped here to refuel. As soon as he was in British colonial territory, Duleep was marched off his ship and told he'd lose his government pension if he didn't return to Britain. Bamba and the children went home, but Duleep wanted nothing more to do with Britain and now saw taking his India office pension as dealing with the devil.
His strengths as a man are his ability not to be knocked over. His like a sort of, one of those things that children used to play with, where he keeps popping back again. He keeps moving forward to what he thinks is his destiny. He won't take no for an answer.
Duleep stayed in Aden, where he publicly converted back to the Sikh faith of his childhood.
Partly it's embracing the Sikh faith and becoming who he was. But I think more than that, it's to hurt Victoria. It's, Christianity mattered to her so much. His immortal soul mattered to her so much. So if he's going to drop kick that, he's doing that largely to hurt her, to show her.
Jasdeep Singh has found new evidence that hints at what was going on in Duleep's mind when he was raging against the British Empire. It's some personal letters in which Duleep, now pushing 50, wrote about his childhood guardian, John Logan.
Duleep Singh seems to be digging deep into his suppressed memories to bring out things that seem to have been hidden for so long. He writes on one occasion where Sir John struck him. He says, which was a most cowardly act, all because I wanted to have an extra lesson of music a week. He's trying to find little things. He's trying to find anything to show that they have not been just guardians.
When Duleep wrote these letters to Lena Logan, her husband John was long dead. At his guardian's funeral a decade earlier, Duleep had fallen on the grave crying, "I have lost my father, for he was indeed my father, and more than my father." But that was before he felt betrayed by Britain.
Here is a pivotal point when he severs his ties with his guardians, and he describes his awakening with this story. He says, once upon a time, a carrier crow finding a falcon's egg conveyed it to his own nest, where it hatched with his own. But one day, when the falcon was fully fledged, it saw its reflection in a pool of water and discerned that he was different from the rest. Therefore, he quitted his foster parents to seek his own kindred and race. This is exactly what Duleep Singh has done, and there remaineth nothing else but revenge, revenge, revenge.
In June 1886, Duleep travelled from Aden to Paris. Here, he began his rebellion against the British Empire.
Paris in the 1880s would be a wonderful place to have been. It's full of painters, artists, dramatists, also anarchists, political theorists, socialists. He's yet another conspirator in town, but this one is rather interesting. Duleep is what Lenin would describe as a useful idiot. A character who doesn't really know what's going on and yet has a charisma around him and an indomitable will to do the wrong thing, to keep marching to what he perceives as his destiny, which other much more subtle players can use to their own ends.
Duleep scoured the boulevards for someone who could help him get back to India. He found Colonel Carroll Tevis. A veteran of the US Civil War turned soldier of fortune, Tevis boasted that he was a friend of any enemy of the British Empire.
Duleep is flattered, intrigued. He's never been a soldier himself. Here is a man who's led troops in battle, knows his way around a sand table, knows what a cavalry sabre is, and of course, that's what I need. This is great.
With the support of Tevis, Duleep devised a treasonous plot. He would raise the Sikhs against Britain and win back the Kingdom of Lahore by brute force. Historian Christy Campbell looked into the British government archives to find out what it knew of Duleep's bold plan. He soon smelt a rat.
It was the realization I couldn't take these characters on face value, that everybody was potentially a double agent. In an archive, I found a letter which said, Tevis in British pay. Gosh.
Tevis, who claimed to be a die-hard anti-imperialist, was a British agent. And Duleep's every move was being reported back to the India office in London. In another archive, Campbell made further startling discoveries. He found Tevis's top-secret dispatches, which revealed what Duleep Singh was plotting. He was trying to bring down the British Empire.
There are two things that make this particularly exciting. The fact it's secret and the fact it survived at all when it should have been burned. What it is I call it's eavesdropping on history. It's almost doorstepping. I'm a former journalist. It's almost doorstepping history and finding something which no scholar has found before until I was lucky enough to find this book.
In March 1887, Tevis sent London a transcript of a letter Duleep had written to the Tsar of Russia, a country Britain had recently been at war with.
And it says this: "May it please your Imperial Majesty, I venture to address you, sir, in the ardent hope that your Imperial Majesty may be graciously pleased to hear my prayer. I am an unfortunate Indian prince, one of the monuments of British injustice and cruelty. I implore you, sire, to find a safe asylum in your Imperial Majesty's dominions." This is an opening bid by the Maharaja to get the patronage of one of the most powerful men on earth, who is the Russian Tsar, the supreme autocrat. And they let us get more and more both oleaginous and violent and threatening indeed. And when he breaks the bounds of English piety and goes a little potty, in my view.
In the 1880s, the Tsar was Queen Victoria's only serious rival in the struggle to rule the world. Above all, he wanted India, which Russia could invade from its own territory to the northwest. This would mean entering the subcontinent through the Kingdom of Lahore. And Duleep said that if Russia helped him retake Lahore, he'd hold the door open for them to march on south, so the Tsar could supplant Victoria as ruler of all India.
The time we're looking at is extremely volatile. It's power politics at its most rough and raw. Because we're dealing with autocrats, with emperors and empresses, and Maharajas indeed, the idea is that policy involving the fates of millions can be articulated at this extraordinary personal level. It's like, Your Supreme Majesty, why not have a go? Here I am, I'm available.
The India Office did all it could to wreck Duleep's conspiracy. An approach was made to Duleep's eldest son, Victor. He wrote Duleep a letter begging him to return to Britain. Victor told his father that because the India Office pension had been stopped, the family was in dire straits. Duleep replied, saying, "Look upon me as dead. I would see you starve and even take your life, but will never return to England. I am entirely changed since you last saw me."
Yeah, that letter is terribly sad. And I think it speaks to this just very conflicted mind that he's in at the moment.
It's often, I think, the way, isn't it? If you've been subject to a sort of a miserable childhood, you often visit that on your children, don't you? And I think he does do that to his children, sadly.
Duleep carried on with his rebellion, and in the winter of 1887, he was in Moscow. He didn't have Tevis with him, who'd been left in Paris to run operations from there. But Duleep was not alone. The 49-year-old's companion was 18-year-old Ada Wetherill. Duleep had met her when she was working as a hotel chambermaid and had brought her with him from Paris.
He has this beautiful young woman on his arm in the shape of Ada, who is quite a lot younger, and everybody comments on how very pretty she is until she opens her mouth and she speaks with a commoner's accent. He's regaining some of what he's lost. Those halcyon days in Elveden when everybody came and was cheering for Duleep, he gets a bit of that back.
Duleep began openly boasting about his conspiracy. In London, the satirical magazine Punch reported that he was any day expecting to meet the Tsar to finalize invasion plans. When Duleep's treason became public knowledge, his loyal wife Bamba was hissed at by her husband's former society friends. And aged 39, she started drinking herself to death.
She rallies once, and that's when her daughter, her youngest daughter, Sophia, becomes sick, really seriously sick. And she's lying in bed with this very high temperature, and Bamba is praying by her bedside, please, please, please God, spare her, please God, spare her. When Sophia opens up her eyes in the morning, her fever has broken, but her mother has died, praying by her bedside.
In Moscow, Ada gave birth to a girl, christened Pauline. The Tsar heard that Duleep was living with an ex-chambermaid and their illegitimate child, and refused to meet him. Duleep's plan to invade India and bring down the British Empire was in tatters. It's not known exactly what part the British government played in his undoing beyond the spying of Tevis, and the India Office was among the first to learn that Duleep's rebellion was over.
This is a letter written in the depth of the Muscovite winter in December 1887, when snow has fallen both on the city and on the Maharaja's plans and on his morale. And it says, "My dear blank," but we can assume it's to Carol Tevis. "So, my dear friend, all our endeavours have proved useless, but I shall still wait here in hopes of receiving a reply of some kind or another, after which I shall leave for Paris and bury myself in utter oblivion."
Duleep had one last card to play. Once back in Paris, he wrote to Queen Victoria begging for forgiveness. She was then in France on holiday and invited Duleep to her hotel.
He goes and he asks for forgiveness and then just sobs and cries uncontrollably to the point where Victoria doesn't know what to do with him.
Victoria recorded this meeting with Duleep in her diary, saying, "I made the poor broken-down Maharaja take a seat, and almost immediately afterwards, he broke into a most violent fit of weeping. I took and stroked his hand, and he became calmer and said, "Pray excuse me and forgive my grievous faults." To which I replied, "That is all forgiven and past." He complained of his health and said he was a poor, broken-down man. After a few minutes' talk about his sons and daughters, I wished him goodbye and went upstairs again, very thankful that this painful interview was well over. Soon after his last meeting with the Queen, Duleep died, alone in Paris, on the 22nd of October, 1893. He was only 55. He was the last Maharaja of Lahore. His former kingdom remained part of the British Empire until India became independent in 1947, when it was divided up between India and Pakistan. And Duleep's dynasty ended with him. None of his 8 children, 6 with Bamba and 2 with Ada, had children of their own.
All of his children are moulded by the trauma that he has experienced and that he visits upon them. Duleep Singh was just such a dreadful father to them.
The rebellious Maharaja, who had been captured and seduced by the British Empire before being undermined and betrayed by it, was buried with Christian rites in the graveyard at Elveden.
It's one of these strange forgotten places, and there it is, this great Victorian ornate grave. It mentions he was the king of Lahore. And what's particularly poignant are offerings left by pious Sikhs, little lights or little bowls of food or flowers around the grave in memory of their lost leader. You could talk about history a lot. You can say it's all about kings and queens and other people tell you it's about the price of wheat or machine gun rates of fire. Actually, you get to these points when the story of the man or the woman becomes so lively that that all falls away. And that's when my heart goes out, in a way, goes out to him.
I think the Duleep Singh story perhaps embodies that really tricky relationship between Britain and India, which for a while some Indians may have convinced themselves was, if not benevolent, then benign. It's what happens. But then when you look back on it, you see the utter trail of devastation that it actually left. And it could happen to the very poor who suffered from famine, or the very, very rich like Duleep Singh, who plummet like this rock into a well.